How self-hate begins. As human beings, we share a combination of unique characteristics that make us highly susceptible to the generation and continuation of self-hate. As members of our species, we have the special ability to observe ourselves and to be critical of ourselves. We also have long memories. Unlike other creatures whose present, or here and now, is relatively short, our now is composed of a continuum of feeling and behavioral information which goes back to our earliest days. We are also exceedingly sensitive to receiving and registering information and influences from outside ourselves, especially at a very early age. Thus, we are less subject to, but also less protected by, inborn biological, instinctual patterns. This means that, unlike other organisms, we are capable of a great range of feelings and behavior and have a very large spectrum of adaptability. But this very ability to adapt and to be freer than other creatures from inborn primitive biological dictates also makes us particularly sensitive to influences from outside ourselves as we grow up. When these influences are antithetical to what and whom a growing person actually is, i.e., actual self, the very vulnerable, fragile, and highly receptive child develops hate for himself. What gives this process particular impact is a child's extraordinary and very real dependence on the parent in early life. Initially, the child probably feels like an extension of his parent. As such, he or she is exquisitely responsive to a parent's own self-hate, as well as to any manifestations that may be perceived as hatred for the newly developing individual. If hatred, as perceived by the child, as received from a parent, is particularly malignant, this makes matters worse in two ways. First, the child obviously develops more self-hate and a greater ability to reject himself. Secondly, as a result of self-rejection and lack of development of confidence in self, he feels that he cannot depend on himself. Thus, dependence on the parent is prolonged, as is his inability to differentiate himself from his parent. This further extends the period during which he will suffer parental onslaught, completing a vicious cycle from which it is most difficult to extricate himself. The process becomes particularly potent in the case of parents who have strong needs to comply with so-called cultural norms. In this way, we have a baby who is utterly dependent on his parents for satisfaction of real needs and for protection against any danger he may be vulnerable to in his newborn state. His parents must, especially in a highly intricate and complex culture such as we live in, teach him rights, wrongs, permissions, and prohibitions. Every baby must absorb a message which states that not all of his natural and immediate impulses or proclivities are acceptable. Therefore, even in the healthiest family environment, the baby inevitably learns to observe himself, judge himself, and to reject certain aspects of himself. He also learns that bad aspects of himself bring on punishment. He too learns to punish himself for being bad. This is the price we pay for culture and civilization. But in many cases, especially with apprehensive parents, bad, unfortunately, comes to cover much human ground. Characteristics described by the culture as bad and viewed with particular abhorrence include aggressiveness, passivity, jealousy, envy, hostility, anger, laziness, cowardice, fear, helplessness, etc. Let me give a small example at this point. Let's say parents are dealing with Jill, one of their 3 children, who is 3.5 years old, vis-a-vis a bowl of cherries. Jill loves cherries, is eating them from the bowl, and unless stopped at some point will happily go on to eat all of them. Her mother asks her to stop eating them. Jill objects, truthfully stating that she feels like eating them all. Her mother then says, "Don't be a selfish girl, leave some cherries for your brother and sister." Jill's appetite is overwhelming and she keeps eating cherries. Her mother calls her a bad and selfish girl, slaps her hands, and takes away the cherries. Jill cries for a minute, stops, and then goes on to play with a doll. But much has happened. Jill is of an age when she no longer feels she is an extension of her mother. But even though she is a separate, whole individual, she is still highly dependent on her mother and enormously sensitive to all things she perceives in herself, to influences from outside, and to the impact of outside influences on herself. What her mother says and does not only registers but is also permanently recorded, especially when it is repeated again and again. What did Jill hear and register? She heard more than her mother's words. The impact comes from mood, tone of voice, implied messages, and action, if any, in this case, slapped hands. What then did Jill really hear? She heard that appetite is bad, that wanting all the cherries is selfish, that selfishness is a bad thing, that a desire to share is a good feeling, that bad feelings bring on deprivation of love as well as consequent punishment. Jill learns that aspects of herself are intolerable, that she must view them with suspicion and not like them, and in so doing she is not liking and rejecting part of herself. She also learns that when certain aspects of herself surface and are exposed, they need to be put down, hidden, depressed, and that she may require punishment, eventually from herself, in order to do this. Of course, this was a mild message. It could be harsher, more frequent, and applied much too liberally to all kinds of natural human urges and proclivities. But it could be more compassionate, too. Her mother might have said, "Of course you want all the cherries, Jill. Eating cherries makes us feel like eating more and more, so that we forget other people want them too, and we want to eat them all. The other children will want some too, so I have to put some away for them." The important difference in this message is that it makes none of Jill's feelings pejorative. In effect, it says, you are allowed to feel any way at all, and indeed you ought to have and own all your feelings, even if you can't satisfy them. Thus there is no repression of them and no inclination to punishment for having them. Unfortunately, few of us as parents are geared to understanding the value of feelings, all feelings, and the need to prevent cutting them off through repression and inhibition. Feelings that are repressed become exaggerated, develop an autonomy of their own, and when they emerge, as they inevitably must from time to time, bring on a conditioned pattern of self-hate, often in the form of depression. Depression provides punishment, as well as an active process of putting oneself and one's feelings down. It provides a kind of anesthesia so that no feelings, including unacceptable ones, are experienced with any great intensity. Thus, depression serves an important enough emotional economy to give it an almost addictive quality, and once it is used, it is generally used again and again.